Good afternoon, dear friends. Another episode of the Global Potato Economy. With me is your host, Sergei Nikolaevich Strokov. Good day.
Hello, Viktor Alexeyevich.
The last time we met was last year. The situation has changed this month. President Trump has taken office in the United States, who has created some sort of adaptation, both within the US and outside of the United States, not only in both the political and economic aspects. What about potatoes? What's happening right now in the United States?
All right, Viktor Vasilievich, I think let's use your question and elaborate a bit. Let's give our listeners some additional information about what Trump is doing and why he's doing it, because it really matters. Because our media presents it in a very easy, almost voluntaristic sense, but that's not the reality. The thing is that Trump introduced additional import taxes, specifically 25% on all goods from Mexico, 25% on all goods from Canada except for energy resources. That is oil, gas, and petroleum products. There is a 10% tax on them and 10% for China on all goods. That's it. But it wasn't done just because he thought of it. There was a reason behind it. Specifically, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. What's most interesting is that in 1977, this law was passed by Congress to limit the president's power. And under this law, the president has the right to use these powers only in the case of an external threat. And pay attention, none of the American lawmakers dispute his right to use this law. Oh, by the way, this law was used for the first time. Nixon, in 1979, due to the Iranian crisis, let me remind our listeners that in 1979, the American embassy in Tehran was seized, and there were hostages taken, Americans. And that's when, for the first time, Darwin Nixon introduced these very restrictions on Iran using this law. What happened next? Do you remember, Viktor Alexeyevich, when you asked me, I told you they would come to an agreement very quickly. I couldn't even imagine that they would come to an agreement in just one day.
It literally happened in just a few hours, I think.
On Friday, he announced this decision, Trump. And on Saturday, the Canadian Prime Minister and the President of Mexico called him, and he, after listening to them, postponed the implementation of these. The situation for Canada and Mexico is set for 30 days until March 4th. Why did he do that? Because they met his first main condition. After all, Trump introduced these concepts, meaning these measures for protection, for the security, to ensure the safety of the United States. And what threat did he see? He saw a threat in terms of illegal immigration that was seeping through the Canadian and Mexican borders, and plus the supply of fentanyl, which, as he claims, was produced in China, supplied to Canada and Mexico, and from there brought into the United States. He demanded the introduction of more serious, let's say, checks at the border. They agreed to that. Each side allocated an additional 10,000 people. From Mexico's perspective, these will be National Guards. And from Canada's perspective, it's just additional border service personnel. And plus, I think very few people, I noticed this, but Trump declared drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And he demanded that Canada and Mexico agree to these definitions. And if they agree within 30 days, then it means a very important point. This means that the armed forces of the United States can enter the territory of Canada and Mexico without asking for permission to eliminate terrorist organizations. So everything Trump does actually makes a lot of deep sense for him and is based on a serious legal foundation. In this whole story, only one remained. The victim being China, because China did not agree to any concessions. So starting from February 1, restrictions have been imposed on it, 10% on all types of products. China responded with similar measures. he imposed a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas, 10% on oil, agricultural machinery, and trucks. And plus, they filed a complaint with the WTO as a law-abiding country that is a member of the WTO. By the way, I just want to say, Viktor Alexeyevich, having dealt with WTO issues for a long time, I can tell you that the United States and China are the most active members. They have filed the most complaints and are the most frequent defendants. So he's using all the mechanisms to prove his point. Well, let's move on to potatoes. Well, if Canada was also planning to impose retaliatory sanctions right away, but not on all products, but let's say on half of them. But she didn't manage to do that. And by the way, she crossed out potatoes from that half. So potatoes are not affected. Plus, I would like to point out to our listeners that this is not just simple three. These are the election countries like Canada, the USA, and China. These are the main partners of the United States. Well, if we take a look, the list of countries that trade with the United States, they are in the top three. Each of these countries exports more than $400 billion worth of products to the United States. Altogether, they go far beyond $1 trillion. So these are not just trading partners, they are the main trading partners. And that's why American experts have long calculated and stated that any sanctions imposed by Trump immediately hit the American consumer. Only preliminary estimates at the end of December last year indicated that if he fully implemented this, it would cost American consumers around $500–600 billion. Well, my last one, the idea, I would say, is that if he had implemented all of this, and when the Canadians agreed to this, and despite the fact that all the potato farmers and other involved parties raised a fuss, the involved parties, I don't think it would have any significant impact, especially on potato trade. We know very well, and we've discussed this several times in our show, that Canada has a relationship with the United States. There's a very clear division of markets in this area. Canada supplies 1 million tons of frozen potatoes to the United States, mainly on the East Coast. So the Americans can export about the same amount, 1 million tons, but to South American markets and the Pacific, no one can change that. So even within 6 months, it wouldn't be possible. All contracts would remain intact. This burden would be shared equally, both importers and exporters.
Well, accordingly, that is the situation that is happening now with President Trump does not in any way affect the potato market in North America.
Right now, it doesn't reflect at all, and it probably wouldn't have reflected. Nothing would change. This is like we see certain methods of political work by Trump, but that doesn't mean that these methods, immediately change the market. That's not the case. Markets operate on their own dynamics. American businessmen are not the type to immediately rush to do what Trump said. Right now, I've counted 25 lawsuits filed against his initiatives, and all at the federal level. And believe me, in America, they take this very seriously. Everyone will consider it harshly. Already, for example, one lawsuit, the judge has already granted it. No actions. Regarding US government officials cannot operate right now. Yes. Trump was able to close the USA. They just took and closed the door. But this doesn't affect the employees at all. They will all continue to receive their salaries until their issue is resolved.
Okay, but in 2024, before Trump comes in, overall, were there any changes? Export, import? Between the main trading partners of the USA, were there any changes at all?
No. Absolutely. Nothing happened. There are global trends, as I mentioned, that for the last few decades, let's say Canada, Mexico, and China have been the main trading partners, and nothing is changing here. Since it has already become so intertwined with many economic and technological chains, it's impossible to break this. This is understood in Washington, Beijing, Ottawa, and Mexico City.
I understand. Well, look, overall, global potato consumption is growing. And in some regions, for example, it's in Iran, there's a potato crop failure. In Central Asia, they're trying to implement some sort of border closure on potato exports, which might lead to a drop in prices within countries, yes, and to the impoverishment, I would say, of farmers. But I hope this won't happen. In Europe, in Germany, there is a sharp increase in potato consumption. What is this related to? What questions?
Well, let's put it this way, Igor Alexeyevich, there haven't been any particularly sharp changes. Having analyzed this question of yours, I don't see it. So let's just take a look at the football. The thing is, last year was quite interesting for Germany and for all of Europe. Despite the bad weather, it was one of the most record-breaking potato harvests. Germany harvested 9 million tons of potatoes. And accordingly, we understand that the supply of potatoes in the market has increased. Because of this, prices have dropped, and some trade flows have started to change, but they are still happening within the trends that have been present in recent years. So, for example, there was a process of increasing processing. It continued to increase in Germany in line with the introduction of new capacities. What about that? Germany supplies fresh potatoes to the Netherlands and Belgium. It has increased these supplies. So last year, the export of fresh potatoes simply rose to millions of tons. And at the same time, there are still large stocks left in Germany, which of course put pressure on the market. And accordingly, they contribute to the formation of lower prices. But if we look at the consumption by the population, nothing has changed. Moreover, the consumption of fresh potatoes has been slightly declining, and it continues to do so. For example, before the pandemic, consumption in Germany was millions, and now it has become, and considering the population growth, this indicates that the population has actually decreased. Buying fresh potatoes, and as we've mentioned several times, the consumption of processed potatoes is growing, primarily potatoes for processing.
Yes, there is a trend towards increased processing, and we are seeing it in our country. I think that in the next few years in Russia, we will see the opening of new factories or the reconstruction and modernization of existing production facilities. Well, let's talk about Europe. What market conditions have affected prices in countries like Belgium, France, and the Netherlands? Also,
I suggest we take a market analysis approach and see what's happening on the supply side, as the English say, of supplies to the market, and how these relationships are formed with demand. That is, the demand from consumers. Look here. The Netherlands, just like Germany, is among the main potato producers. It is in third place there, after Germany and France. But at the same time, the trends there are completely different. If in Germany in recent years we have seen an increase in sown areas, an increase in production, and an increase in yield, in the Netherlands, the exact opposite process is happening. Look at what has happened just in the last 5 years. Production has decreased from millions to the sown areas have decreased from 166,000 hectares to 155,000 hectares. And the yield, which is the most surprising, is almost nowhere else in the world happening like this. In the Netherlands, the yield is decreasing. It was at the level of 50 tons per hectare. Tons per hectare just 10 years ago, and now it has actually dropped to 43. So what's actually happening? What's happening is that the Greens, and so the environmental activists have achieved that agriculture in the actual Netherlands is slowly becoming illegal. Livestock farms are closing down. The consumption of fertilizers is decreasing. And since the consumption of fertilizers and protective agents is decreasing, accordingly, the yield is falling. That's why there is less potatoes in the Netherlands. So what are the Netherlands doing? The Netherlands is importing potatoes from Germany.
I was in December in Egypt. Egypt was also increasing its production and the volume of processed potatoes. Last year in Europe, as well as in Turkey, the overall harvest wasn't great, but there were changes. In Turkey, as part of the frozen potato export, there are also changes in frozen potato exports. What changes are currently happening in Turkey?
Okay. Turkey is also an interesting country in this regard, as last year it also had a record potato harvest. They harvested 1 million tons, which is significantly 1 million more than in 2023. What about that? If earlier Turkey was ranked 15th in production, this can be seen, especially in my article, which was published in the latest issue of the magazine Potato System. There Turkey ranks 15th. Now, with this surge, Turkey will most likely take 10th place, and it is reaching production levels comparable to countries like the Netherlands, Canada, and Egypt. And at the moment in Turkey, according to experts, there are still 2 million tons of potatoes lying around that obviously cannot be consumed within the country. And they are really counting on the expansion of exports, especially the expansion of frozen potato exports. And here we have a not very interesting situation for Turkey. The thing is, Turkey has been expanding its frozen potato export and production in recent years thanks to Russia. So that was its main market. And in 2022, Turkey imported 70,000 tons of frozen meat to Russia. French fries. Considering that many European and American producers have left this market, Turkey took advantage of this situation. But the celebration didn't last long already in 2024. Supplies in Russia decreased to 40,000. And considering that the company Wefry, as they call themselves for some reason in English, but from Lipetsk, announced the establishment and introduction of new production capacities already at the beginning of the year, and they intend to expand their production to 350,000 tons, which is about twice as much as it is now. The current market in Russia, then, accordingly, the Turks have no prospects, and most likely by 2025, they will lose the Russian market. They will need to look for a market in other countries.
Yes, as for the companies that we fry or whiff, I'm planning to visit their site at the beginning of March, and I'll be happy to share the video, how the launch of the second line is going, at what stage it is. All Russian farmers are expecting this as it is. In any case, processing always means stable contracts, long-term ones, and probably this year at the Potato and Vegetables exhibition, the company AgroTrade held the roundtable, and the key topic was that processing enterprises are one of the drivers of growth. Processing and potato production. As for the Pyrenees, Spain, Portugal, they usually supplied early potatoes to Europe, particularly to England, France, Germany. What's happening in these countries right now? What changes are taking place, and what are the forecasts for the future?
If we look at the long-term trends, they are negative. So both in Portugal and in Spain primarily, and in Portugal, there is a decrease in potato production and a reduction in the area planted. And since they are losing out in terms of productivity and cost to both the French and the Germans, first of all, now they are losing even more on top of everything to Egypt. As we discussed in the last broadcast, just in the past year, the export of early potatoes from Egypt to Spain has increased fourfold. And Spain was basically a monopoly in this market. Now Egypt is gradually taking this monopoly for itself, right? but the situation for them still remains quite favorable. Well, the prices are really good. I just looked at the price dynamics and was honestly surprised. Just imagine in Spain back in 2021 in January, just so we can see the price of potatoes. The purchase price was 250 euros per ton. Now it's 480.
That's significant.
The cost of production has increased, of course, yes, but the price has also risen significantly. The same goes for Portuguese potato farmers. They are now sharply increasing production of potatoes for processing because the price for it is good. They are concluding contracts for delivery for processing, but in doing so, they lose the French retail potato market. So the situation there is also quite ambiguous.
Well, let's hope that prices will be high everywhere in the world, but not inflated. The harvest will be comparable to consumption, and this year, 2025, will probably pleasantly surprise us in some way. I really hope so. And I would like to say, Sergei Nikolaevich, we've already started announcing the potato tour across Russia. This event is very large scale. I plan to visit from the Leningrad region to the Krasnoyarsk territory, from the Arkhangelsk region to the Republic of North Ossetia. Overall, I will probably travel about 40,000 kilometers this year, and of course, I would like to see how Russian potato farmers operate. And first of all, to give our farmers an understanding, a sense that the work they do is necessary, and the level of potato farming that we have in the country is no worse, and sometimes even better than global practices.
Good luck to you, Viktor Alexievich. I will keep an eye on this.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Goodbye.